Hey guys, Lucchese here again. Hello. We just had the Gwent Challenger, which was so good. Like amazing matches, super high level of play, very high stakes as you can see here. This is from the Play Gwent YouTube, so you can actually watch the matches if you ended up missing it. This was $100,000 prize pool, semifinals and finals. I'm not going to discuss the results of any of the matches and stuff, so other than the fact this is a semifinal, so I mean I can't do anything about that, but what I'm going to talk about today is the idea of the dry pass as a viable opening like tactic or technique or something like that. Like, the way I see the dry pass right now is, if I was going to make a comparison, for example, to chess, like right now Gwent is in a developmental state in terms of there are still aspects of the game which aren't solidified for everybody, and even when they are, like, stuff changes all the time in card games. Like, they'll introduce new mechanics and things like that, but what I mean is that we're at the point right now where players are developing strategies and understandings and things like that based on the game as it is, right? And for example, in chess, things like the openings, like chess openings, they've been developed over time. Like, at first you come up with an idea, and then there are hundreds and thousands of games played, and then some players figure out innovations or different, moves to make at certain times, and some openings are just like found to be, inefficient, unreliable, and just not used anymore and things like that. So the way I see the dry pass right now is similar to that. I think that the dry pass is fundamentally unsound, just on a conceptual level. So I feel like it's just, it's going to be like a chess opening that isn't used very often. Like, there are certain situations where you still might employ a technique. In this case, what I'm covering is players that are at the highest level of the game, like Lifecoach and Freddy are two of the best players in Gwent right now. Like, so my concern isn't about will the technique work in some cases when the opposition isn't equal to you. That's not my concern. My concern is it solid, and does it represent an actual understanding of the game? Like, I'm interested in understanding the game, right? Like, I want to know how to play Gwent based on the truth. I'm talking about capital T, right? Like, you guys know what I mean. So on that basis, I'm going to argue in this video that dry passing, what I mean by that is you're the opening player and you decide to pass at 0 used cards or points and give your opponent the round for some reasons, and we'll cover some. I think it's unsound. I just don't, I never, like, basically never dry pass. I've done it on a couple of occasions. I don't think it's actually a good way to go about it. Anyway, so let's move on. So yeah, I'll show here what Lifecoach is the first player to act, and the action he takes is his open here, so you guys can see what I mean. Okay. So he's first to act, and he decides to just pass without using anything and give Freddy the round. At Freddy, any resource that Freddy wants to use to take the round here. And it's always, this is another point to cover here, it is always correct as the player that gets passed to in this spot to use a card. You don't just like pass back and then go to round 3. You just win this round, for reasons that are going to come up in the rest of the video. So, in terms of why it's employed right now, the dry pass, there are some good ideas behind it, like pros. Let's talk about pros and cons of it and stuff, and then I can actually cover why I think the cons, like, they just outweigh the pros so much in this case. So, number one, if you dry pass, you avoid losing the first round on even cards. Okay, so that's true every single time. So what happens here is they're both at 11 cards. Life Coach will pass here, maintain 11 cards. Freddy will use 1 card and be at 10. And then you go into the next round, just keeping the card counts. It doesn't matter about draws, 10 to 11, right? Then if Freddy wants to continue in the next round without passing back directly, he will use another card, which will put him at 9, and then Life Coach will be at 11, and then he plays a card to 10, and he has an effective +1 cards if he can maintain tempo above Freddy, right? So that's a decent idea, generally, right? Additionally, if you dry pass in certain matchups, you will kind of like facilitate for your opponent to draw bad cards. Example, in this case, right? In this matchup where it's Nilfgaard versus a consume token hybrid is what Freddy's playing. Freddy's playing 3 Neckers, of course, and having multiples in hand is like kind of iffy. You really, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't want it. He's playing 3 Harpies. You definitely don't want to have Harpies in your hand. Maybe he's playing Foglet and things of that nature, you know. So if there are a lot of dead draws in a certain deck, for example, Northern Realms is another example where there could be considered dead draws. You could employ a dry pass to try to make it so your opponent draws a bunch of unfavorable cards in their hand and things like that, right? So there are some pros, right? But here are the cons, and I think if we're maintaining the comparison to chess, right, in chess openings, like a chess engine will be calculating certain scenarios that are imbalanced, right? Like, this is an imbalanced situation that Life Coach is creating where he will maintain his cards, Freddy will use some cards, and for him giving up the first round, Freddy will be using more cards than Life Coach for a given amount of time as long as tempo is maintained, right? So there's the word I'm trying to use here in comparison to chess is compensation, okay? So is there enough compensation, the pros that there are in the dry pass, is that enough to give up a round for free? And I think the answer is no. Like, I think it's pretty clearly no, in my opinion. So the cons here, first con, of course, you give up the round for free to your opponent, right? There are just the way that decks work, either long or short-term resources that you're using in the deck, the way your deck is designed. And by dry passing, you're allowing your opponent to win a round without using any of the resources at all. Like, Freddy gets the choice of possibly the worst card in his hand here to win the round. And he could easily just pass back the second round to get that card back. So, in effect, he will be giving you the round back, but then he maintains last say in round 3. There's no way to quantify exactly how many points that's worth. Like, last say in round 3, we can't say it's worth exactly 10 points or anything like that, but I can give you guys an example, and I'm going to do that. So here's the example of how valuable last say is in the last round. This is just an example from Amir, since it's one of the decks that we're covering, right? So last say is, in the last round, you get to react to your opponent. So he will be first to act, then you get to play a card, right? So let's say the last round is 2 cards, and your 2 cards are Infiltrator and Menno. This way. Your 2 cards are Infiltrator and Menno, right? If you have last say, your opponent will play a card, then you can use an infiltrator to give it spying, then the opponent will play another card, and you can use Menno to destroy that card, right? Vice versa, if you have to act first, you would have to use infiltrator without getting the effect of giving something spying, and then play the Menno as a 12 possibly, if you get to deal 4 damage to an enemy, right? So in this case, last say is worth quite a bit, actually, because you get to basically destroy your opponent's first play, if that's applicable in this case. But you can see the point. Another example of this is if, for example, you know your opponent is playing something like Scorch, Igni, Coral, anything that can react to a big unit you have. If you have last say in round 3, you can hold your Joaquin, for example, and they will be forced to act before you. They'd have to play their Scorch, Coral, Igni before you play Joaquin, so then you can protect this unit. That's another example of where they're worth a lot. Like, last say is worth a lot in those cases, right? So, a second con, so you give your opponent the round for free without they have to use nothing of resources from their deck. Then a second con is that your opponent gets to maintain last say in round 3. And I'm talking about in terms of high level play. I'm going to switch back to the other screen here. So to further expand on that point, at high level, where it's Freddy versus Lifecoach, right? Freddy understands that there is a bit of a dangerous situation if you are not able to maintain tempo. If your opponent dry passes and they are able to equalize or maintain tempo, or, you know, be in the tempo lead against you, then you will be down a card. That's true, right? But when we're talking about two of the best players in the game, Freddy understands that concept, and he will not allow Lifecoach to be plus or equal tempo in where he can avoid it. For example, if there's a situation where the points are close enough that he expects that Lifecoach will be able to overcome in one card or something like that, then he will just get out of the round, right? So the biggest con, like the two cons I've covered are, you know, they're significant, but not the biggest. The biggest con of the dry pass is that you actually shift control of the match to your opponent completely. Once you pass the first round and give your opponent the round for free without them having to use resources, either long or short, it doesn't matter, your opponent gets to dictate how long he wants to play that second round. Like, if he knows his deck is good in a short round in round 3, then he can just push you as long as he wants because you gifted him the first round. And the other way around as well, which actually did end up happening in another match in the finals. If you know that you have a good setup for a long round 3, once your opponent dry passes round 1, you can just immediately pass back round 2, and you have the long round 3 with last say, like I've covered in the rest of the video. So, that being said, I think these ideas kind of clearly represent why, obviously it's my opinion right now, right? But I think if you really think about everything that's going on, like conceptually, I think it's very clear that dry pass is just unsound. Like, if not unsound exactly, we can say unreliable or ineffective to the extent that you'd want it to be, right? Just giving like the slight disclaimer here, because I'm sure there are people that don't, you know, that won't understand it just from just outright talking, but this doesn't have anything to do with like calling a specific player out. Like, I'm not calling Lifecoach out or anything. He's a good player, very good player. It's more about explaining the concept. Like, understanding the game conceptually is what I'm trying to get to, right? So I think based on the way I understand Gwent, I feel like dry passing, unless, you know, it's very specific situation stuff, like maybe you make a deck specifically for dry passing or something like that, but it's like, come on, man, you know, like whatever. Just in general, I don't think it's good. So okay guys, those are my thoughts on the dry pass. I have gotten a request before to cover it, and this is like great that the situation came up in Challenger, which is at the highest level of play, so we can cover the ideas behind it, you know, and maybe what different players think. If you guys have different ideas, I'd love to hear them. Like maybe there are reasons that I'm not thinking about and things like that, and you guys could explain that. Or maybe there are specific matchups where your opponent just can't take advantage of the free round or something like that, and you guys can let me know, because I'm not aware of it yet. Maybe new decks with this new patch or something like that. But anyway, for now, we'll see you guys later. The next time that something cool happens I want to analyze, I'll definitely make a video. And that's it, guys. See ya.